Hello. Hi, everybody. All right, it's good to see everyone, or at least hear from everyone in the weather forecasts, and good to be here again tonight. Should we go ahead and get started?
I think so.
Okay.
We're really excited to see so many people joining from all over the place. A lot of
Yeah.
rainy locations this evening or afternoon for some people.
Yeah. This 7 p.m. slot is hard for our European friends, so sorry about that. So my name's Inga Brody, and many of you know me. I'm co-founder and co-director of Jane Austen and Company, and I'm also the co-founder of Jane Austen Summer Program, which is the umbrella program that runs this and a couple of other, 3 other Jane Austen ventures. So joined tonight by my wonderful co-host, Eric Bontempo, and our technical director for the series is Nadea Pugh. We are all tied together by a love of Austen, British literary and material history, and some ties to UNC Chapel Hill. And tonight is a continuation of our series, The Many Flavors of Jane Austen. It's actually our 5th episode. We're exploring some of today's most creative and engaging adapters of Jane Austen's works. And last time, if those of you were here, we were joined by Sam Wright, who put on quite a show with his Oklahoma-style adaptation musical of Pride and Prejudice called Prejudice and Pride.
Mm-hmm.
And especially his live performance of some of the songs was so much fun. If you weren't able to attend that, or the time before, which was with Sayantani Dasgupta, be sure to check out the recordings available on our website, www.janeaustenandco.org.
And we are so excited for tonight's conversation with Uzma Jalaluddin. And we also have one more upcoming episode in The Many Flavors of Jane Austen. On February 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll be joined by acclaimed author Siri James, author of The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen, The Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen, Jane Austen's First Love, and The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte.
Speaking of Charlotte Bronte, we're excited to bring together 3 formidable, beloved women writers in our next series, Austen and the Brontes. The Austen and the Brontes series will focus on Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and Austen's Northanger Abbey and Emma. So it'll be about the authors in general, but those 4 books. We are inviting experts to weigh in on what makes each writer continually relevant to contemporary discussions on things like gender, vocation of writing, publishing, religion. If you have read Charlotte Bronte's letters, you may know how she famously put down Jane Austen in a craft, saying, "The passions are perfectly unknown to her." So, but this passage is kind of interesting because the question of how 19th century women should express passion, how much passion was considered appropriate to feel, is the kind of question that still persists, and all our 3 authors tackle it in their own ways. So many other important issues will arise when we compare these authors, including the role of religion and the supernatural in literature, women's agency in contemporary society, and the place of the governess, for example, in 19th century literature. So we hope you'll join us, and I hope your book clubs too will read along with the program. So get your copies of those 4 novels out and ready.
Yeah, and this series is going to get underway in the second half of March and continue into April and May. And we'll have that series of experts kind of present periodically throughout that time frame. And we're going to have Siri James back for this next series to help perform virtually a play written by Diane Birchall. And it's called You Are Passionate Jane. And it imagines a conversation in the afterlife between Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. It's funny and heartbreaking at the same time. It encapsulates a lot of the tensions and lived experiences of these two women writers. Additionally, we'll also have a talk by Leslie Peterson, a longtime friend of the Jane Austen Summer Program, and she's going to offer a letter writing workshop in April on the art of ranting. So stay tuned for that date and further information.
Yeah, it's Diana Burchell, actually. And so I'm also excited that we will have a letter writing contest associated with this new series. So if you're a teacher with some flexibility, you might consider working that into your curriculum, or perhaps your book group would like to include this as well. In any case, what you're going to do is imagine a letter written by Austen to her sister Cassandra after having read Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights. It's not possible, historically speaking. But what would Jane Austen admire or dislike about those novels?
All right. Final announcement before we get to our keynote speaker tonight. We are still looking to recruit writers for our new blog series that we're doing for both the Jane Austen and Company and the Jane Austen Summer Program. It's called the Janeite Spotlight Article Series, and it's designed to highlight and celebrate all of you Jane Austen fans from around the world. So we are inviting you to contribute to our blog, to share your Austen origin story and explain why you love her stories. If you're interested, we're going to put a link in the chat that'll take you to a Google form. You'll give us your contact information, and then one of our blog coordinators will be in touch about how you can write this blog for our blog series. And again, we're hoping this will be a fun opportunity for you to showcase your love for Jane Austen and to participate in this global Austen community. Okay, let's get to it. I now want to introduce our featured speaker for tonight. Award-winning author.
Sorry, did we want to let Nadea do some instructions as well?
I'm so sorry. I forgot the instructions. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Nadea.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to YouTube, our streaming platform. If you would like to leave a comment or question, you can do so using the sidebar. It should be on the right side of your screen if you're on desktop, or if you're on mobile or an iPad or something like that. You'll just exit the full screen and it'll be there as well. So please, please, please get your questions and comments in, because tonight our event is going to be a little bit different than they usually are. We're having a moderated discussion, so we will be answering your questions and talking about your comments throughout the presentation. You will need to log into your Google or YouTube account to post using the comment feature on the sidebar, but if you don't have a YouTube or Google account, that's okay as well. You can just submit your questions to info@janeaustenandco.org, and I'll post that email address in the chat for you, and we'll collect questions there and post them for you.
All right. Thank you, Nadea. And without further ado, let's get to know our featured guest tonight. Award-winning author Uzma Jalaluddin is author of Much Ado About Nada, a second chance romance inspired by Jane Austen's Persuasion, and Three Holidays and a Wedding, a multi-faith rom-com co-written with Marissa Stapley. Both of those novels came out just this past year in 2023, it's obviously been a very busy year for you, Uzma. Your debut, Uzma's debut novel, Aisha at Last, which came out in 2019, was a Goodreads Choice Award finalist, Cosmopolitan UK Book of the Year, and Publishers Weekly's Best Book of 2019. Her second novel, Hannah Khan Carries On, was an instant Canadian bestseller and named a Best Romance Novel by the Washington Post. It's currently in development by Amazon Studios and Mindy Kaling. And as of this past year, she can also add Playwright to her long list of accomplishments. Her play, The Rishta, debuted also in 2023 in Toronto as a Silk Road Theatre production. Usma is a former contributor to the Toronto Star and has written for The Atlantic. She lives near Toronto with her husband and two sons, where she also teaches high school. Thank you, Usma, for being with us this evening. We're really just thrilled to have you join us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, Eric and Inga. I'm really happy to be here. It's nice to be reunited.
Yes.
Yes. So you were You joined us for JASP
Right.
almost 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, 2019. When I was just a baby writer, it was one of my first invitations, and I was thrilled to be surrounded by my fellow Austinites.
Wonderful.
I'm also going to just put I'm going to show your personal website here because I know you have other materials and links that people might be interested in. We'll show it again at the end.
Sure.
All right.
So we definitely want audience members to be asking questions, to share their questions in the chats. To get things going, though, Uzma, I'm hoping maybe you can introduce yourself to everyone and explain your connection with Jane Austen. Which of your works do you consider to be Austen adjacent or Austen inspired?
Sure. So I'm an author. I'm basically coming to you from sort of snowy, sort of foggy Toronto. I live in a suburb just slightly north of the city. And I've been reading Jane Austen. I've been in love with Jane Austen's work since I was a very young girl. I think I read Pride and Prejudice, might have been Sense and Sensibility. I can't remember, one of the two, when I was 14 or 15 years old. And I, as soon as I kind of I sank into the story and I got into the flow of the writing, I knew that it was going to be a lifelong obsession. And my first novel, Aisha at Last, is basically inspired by and very, very closely follows the plot of Pride and Prejudice. And my second novel kind of deviated, though I remember, Inga, you and I exchanging a couple of emails. And when I said that the book was inspired by, not by a book, but by a famous 1990s rom-com, You've Got Mail, the movie that was about, between Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, you said that it was also Austen adjacent. So, and then of course, my third novel, Much Ado About Nada, is very much inspired by Persuasion. We'll talk a little bit more about that one. The three books that I have authored by myself are very much heavily influenced by Austen. And it's this theory that I have that when you're young, the books that you read when you're young, they really stay with you. The ones that you love, the ones that touch your heart, just stay with you for the rest of your life.
You once told me a funny story about the Aisha at Last, because I don't think you at first recognized the Austen in it, right?
Yeah. This is the way the subconscious mind works is very interesting. I knew that I wanted to write a book that was set within my Canadian, South Asian, Muslim community in Toronto. And I spent years, like a lot of first-time authors will say this, they spend years writing their first novel. And for me, it took me 8 years because I was also, with my husband raising our sons and being a high school teacher, which is a full-time job. So the writing kind of had to happen in the pockets, and it took 8 years. And it wasn't until I had finished my fourth or fifth draft, and then another writer friend of mine read it and said, "Oh, so you're doing Pride and Prejudice?" And I said, "No, I what are you talking about? It's not Pride and Prejudice." And then I read it over and it was like, how could I have missed the signs? Of course I was writing Darcy and Elizabeth.
What were some of the other books that you enjoyed, the non-Austen books you enjoyed growing up?
So my one of my friends I was chatting with recently reminded me that I was obsessed with the golden age of detective fiction. I've read basically, and by that I mean mostly just Agatha Christie. Like I think I read almost or all of her books, most likely, or 95% of her novels. So it's actually kind of odd that I decided to go into the romance rom-com genre. But I'm rectifying that. My next novel will be a mystery. But I was also a big fan of the 90s rom-coms, and I read a lot of books within that genre. So the classics, the Meg Cabot and the Helen Fielding, and there's so much good. At the time, it's kind of a derogatory term, but at the time it was called chick lit, and now it's more in the women's fiction space or the rom-com space, which has kind of had a bit of a renaissance just as I started my writing journey. But I also really enjoyed the classics. I read all of Austen. I read some of the Brontes, not all of the Brontes. And I liked literary fiction as well. When I was in university, I really got into some South Asian writers, which were just kind of starting, especially coming out of the UK. So Chitra Banerjee, Devaka Rooney had a fantastic collection of stories called Arranged Marriage. And there were other authors of course, their names escape me now, but Vikram Seth was fantastic. Love him. and others as well.
Thank you.
Well, I can tell from comments that we're getting from audience members that there is a lot of excitement about your next novel that is detective fiction. I'm going to go ahead and share this comment from an audience member. And so that's really great. Lots of excitement there for your next novel. We have a question from the audience as well that I'll put up on the screen, and we'll see what you think about this. Did you read Laura Ingalls Wilder ever growing
So
up?
I didn't, but I read a very famous Canadian author who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, Ellen Montgomery. Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote the Anne of Green Gables series, and I was obsessed. I also, of course, read Little Women and the entire series, the Little Women series. But Anne of Green Gables, Lucy Maud Montgomery, I've read everything that she's written. So she was, I guess, the Canadian Laura Ingalls Wilder. And I see the other question is, do I teach Jane Austen? No, for whatever reason, the schools that I've taught at, it's not part of the, because every single school picks the books that they want to kind of teach. And I haven't. I've taught Shakespeare, which is why Shakespeare is another famous author who appears in a lot of my works. And I've taught a lot of Canadian fiction. Of course, I'm in Canada, and some of the classics are things like, like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984, or Catcher in the Rye, and like the typical kind of and they're all male authors, FYI, which is kind of interesting. And now our schools are kind of like taking a more of a stance of having like book clubs. So it's different like within a class, you'll have like 5 or 6 different selections of books that students read on their own, and moving away from having a core novel, which is just the latest fad in teaching.
Mm-hmm.
How's your role as teacher influenced what you write, would you say?
I've thought about this a lot. Because I think when I was younger, I really just wanted to be a writer. And then my father gave me some great advice, which was to get a day job. And all of my volunteer experience, all of my work experience outside of school was related to teaching. I was teaching in summer camps, and I was a tutor for many years, and things like that. And so I became a high school teacher, which actually is a job that I think I'm very well suited for, because I'm very organized, and I have a very empathetic personality. Of course, I'm hilarious as well, which helps. And the sarcasm also helps. Sarcasm helps when dealing with teenagers. Maybe not with elementary kids, because they'll take you seriously. But the teenagers are like, rolling their eyes, and I'm rolling my eyes. It kind of works really well. But I think just in essence, teaching is one of those really interesting jobs where you're privileged enough to meet a whole variety of people, whether it's interesting parents, fantastic parents, challenging parents, really interesting and challenging students, and also my colleagues. So I get like a wide swath of humanity, and I teach at a semester school. Every 5 months, I get 90 new kids that I have to interact with. So it's just the turnover, the turn of the different experiences, even though, of course, the base layer is I'm dealing with teenagers in a particular area of Toronto. So, of course, they're like that. But I think it kind of exercised my muscles in terms of being very observant. And it's made me, I think the heart of being a good writer is having that sense of empathy, which, of course, is something that happens the more you practice, right? So my empathetic muscles have really become quite robust, I think, over the course of teaching. And also just the idea of being organized, because being a writer and also being a teacher, you have to kind of figure out the scheduling of that, which can get very challenging.
Sure. And I mean, it seems like there are many other facets to your career that have you flex that empathy muscle. Like you've been a columnist for the Toronto Star, you've written articles for the Atlantic. Could you talk a little bit more about those facets of your professional life that maybe they link up to Austen somehow, maybe they don't, but we're curious about that aspect of your writing career?
Yeah, for sure. I wrote a column for the Toronto Star, a bi-weekly column. And the Toronto Star is, for those of you who don't know, is one of Canada's largest daily newspapers for about 7.5 years. And when I started, my youngest child was 7, and then by the time I finished, he was, he was 15 years old, and was like, "Please, mom, stop writing about me." So I had to stop. It was a funny column. It was an observational column. I wrote a lot about being a teacher, so I had a lot of readers even now who were like, "Oh, we love reading your insights into teaching," because they're teachers. And a lot of my columns just dealt with, parenthood, what it's like to be a visibly Muslim woman living in Toronto. But it was all kind of lighthearted, and a lot of my books are like that. And so much of Jane Austen is really just focusing on the small, what was that word you used, Eric? Globalization, the the local
Yes.
within the global, right? We'll talk about that some more later.
Mhm.
But so many of my stories are like, for instance, me trying to get my kids excited about the month of Ramadan, right? Which is the Muslim month of fasting. And how do you get your kids excited when the entire month all you're doing is just not eating, so like, and of course they're not fasting, but I'm fasting. So how do I kind of bring them into the spirit of the month when they're young children? And then just relating that to, my experience living in a small neighborhood in Toronto, but then I'm trying to make a wider point. And I think so much of Jane Austen's work is the same way, where she focuses on her reality, her small communities, her small towns, her small villages, and the gossip and the rumors and the sense of trying to establish your status and maintain who you are, and without embarrassing yourself or embarrassing your family is so relevant to my experience living in a very close-knit Muslim community, and also being a citizen of, a small, being a citizen of a neighborhood in a larger city in Canada.
Before we leave Aisha at last and the kind of the beginnings, can you say a little bit about how you handled Austen's wonderful narrator and maybe that particular, famous opening line of Pride and Prejudice?
Oh, yeah. So my take on it in Aisha at Last, and of course I'm referring to Pride and Prejudice. Of it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man of good fortune must be a wanted wife. And I kind of flipped that. Sorry if I misquoted that, but I kind of flipped that, and I said it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single Muslim man. His mother must be in want of, searching for his wife. Sorry, I can't quote it exactly, but I kind of put the onus on the parents. And my book is essentially my first novel, Aisha at Last, is essentially a satire of the idea of arranged marriage and the way that different people approach, reject, or embrace arranged marriage. And I really enjoy kind of flipping certain expectations on its head. The main character, Khalid, is convinced, he's a man, and yet he's convinced that he wants an arranged marriage. And my Lizzie Bennet character, Aisha, of course, is convinced that she doesn't. And both of them are wrong, and both of them are right in hilarious ways.
So with Aisha at Last, if I could ask another question about your debut novel, you stumbled into a Jane Austen adaptation. You didn't start out writing an Austen adaptation, but you realized it halfway through. And if I recall, you kind of made some adjustments to the plot structure. What was that experience like, kind of reinvigorating your novel with Austen's Pride and Prejudice? Was that a fun experience for you? Was it challenging and rewarding?
At that point, I'd been working on my novel on and off, again, while balancing all the other things that I had going on in my life for a few years. And to be honest, it felt like the clouds had parted and I could finally see a way forward with my book. Because I think I was struggling in the weeds. And this happens a lot for debut authors. Your debut authors are often trying to figure out, first of all, grappling with enormous self-doubt, as every artist does, right? We're all like, very delicate flowers. And then in addition to the self-doubt, I was trying to figure out, even though I'm a high school teacher, wait, how do I write a book? Even though I'm a reader and I've been a reader my entire life, but when you actually, have to get into the weeds of writing the book, it's really difficult. You have to think about plot and character and structure and all of that sort of thing. So when my friend pointed out that I was writing Pride and Prejudice, it just dawned on me that I should just lean into it. And I think one of the things that I mentioned too was I was writing this book in 2016, 2017, which isn't that long ago. And yet in terms of publishing, it was almost like a different era. There was starting to be increased interest in including more diverse voices in publishing. And that meant actually encouraging diverse writers to write certain things. But I had grown up in a time when there were very few, unless I was specifically looking for, as I mentioned before, South Asian voices coming out of the UK or Indian authors, literally in India. It was very difficult for me to find any authors who could kind of represent my perspective. I'm the daughter of immigrants who immigrated from India in the 1970s. I grew up in a very specific time. And so there wasn't a lot of diversity in the books that I wrote. You know, to be honest, I read a lot of Jewish authors because they were at least still kind of the other in a way that I could relate to at the time. And so as a result of that, I was really scared. I was like, no one's going to publish my book. My book is very unapologetically Muslim. It just focuses on like this tiny Muslim community in Canada. Who's going to publish this? Nobody. And so I thought if I layered my story, my very specific, unique, I thought funny story, using the framework of something as recognizable as Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, it would sort of lure my readers in, and then I'd grab them with my prose and I'd grab them with my jokes, and it worked. So no regrets.
That's great. We have a question from Shannon Gilligan. Have you read Burnham Wood? It's author Eleanor Catton.
It is on my TBR. I absolutely loved that version of Emma with Anna Taylor-Joy. I thought it was hilarious and so bright and colorful and beautiful. And the minute I saw Burnham Wood, I wanted to pick it up because one of my favorite plays to teach in high school is Macbeth. Kids love it because of the witchcraft and the murder. They're really into both. But then I read the back and it didn't seem to be about Macbeth at all. So I kind of put it at the bottom of the TBR pile, but I'll pick it up if you think it's good.
We'll scoot it up a notch or two.
It was about gardening, and I don't have a green thumb, so I wasn't sure if I was really, maybe I just judged the book by its book blurb, and then I hadn't given it a chance.
So shall I start with the next one, Eric? So we wanted to ask also about your other love, William Shakespeare, that is so prominent, I think, in your work. And so your Much Ado About Nada has a Shakespeare title, but a direct Austen homage, and it seems like maybe a place where you could tell us more about how your love of those two authors kind of intertwines, and a little bit more about the Shakespeare part of it.
Yes, for sure. So when I first set out to write Much Ado About Nada, I knew that I wanted to model some of it on Persuasion, which, as I've grown older, I think Persuasion is my favorite Austen novel. It just has a certain sweetness and also bittersweetness that really appeals to me. But I also wanted to do a bit of a mashup with Much Ado About Nothing, and the thing that appealed to me about Much Ado About Nothing is the kind of madcap, rompy banter between Benedict and Beatrice. I loved it. I love it so much. I mean, I don't know how many of you have watched the movie, the Denzel Washington, Keanu Reeves, Emma Thompson. Yeah, fantastic movie from the 90s of Much Ado About Nothing. And I just had this vision in my mind. And in fact, my entire first and second draft of what the novel that became Much Ado About Nada was exactly that. It was a mashup of Persuasion and Much Ado About Nothing. It even featured at the end of Much Ado About Nothing, there's this kind of interesting switcheroo where there's a bride that is kind of, basically hidden from the groom, and it's supposed to be this like redemptive moment where he agrees to marry anyone because he I think the Duke. He's basically responsible for the death of a hero, and then she reveals herself and it's actually Hero. Anyways, it's also a really weird play. You should definitely check it out. And I had that exact same scene in my book where, you know, someone was basically veiled, and it wasn't the girl, it was the groom, and then he was revealed to be something else. And I handed in the draft to my editor. My editor was fine with it. I even had, you know, the title that works so well because my main character's name is Nada, and Nada, while it is a popular Mediterranean and Middle Eastern and even parts of South Asia, it's a very common name, but it also, of course, means nothing in Spanish. So it worked on multiple levels. Everyone loves a good punny title. And so I had this great title. I handed it into my editor. She liked it. My agent liked it. But when I dived into third round edits, I just realized that the book wasn't working. And this was like horrifying. It was horrifying because I was deep into the publishing process. The book was due in about 2 or 3 months, and I had to basically rip it apart. And no one told me to do it. It was just my writing instinct that was reading it over. And then sometimes you start writing a book with certain types of intentions, like a certain vision for the book. But then you get into it, and then you take a step back. And then when you come back to it, for me, I realized that the book actually didn't want to be Shakespeare. It wanted to be Austen only. It wanted to be Persuasion. And in fact, it would be much stronger with a single viewpoint narrative as opposed to the dual mashup of Shakespeare and Austen. So while I still loved everything that had to do with Shakespeare except for the title, and now I get questions like, how come your Persuasion retelling is called Much Ado About Nada when it's actually Austen and not Shakespeare?
That's great. I think your internet connection might be going in and out a little bit. Uzma,
No.
do you want to tell us about the books behind you that I think probably people are noticing?
Oh yeah. So my books are basically the books that I've written. So this is Aisha at Last. That's the blue one, and then I have. Is my internet okay? Can you all hear me? Yes, it's okay. This is Hanahan Carries On, and this was the book that was inspired by You've Got Mail, and it's currently being developed for film by Amazon Studios. My most recent book is, of course, Much Ado About Nada, which is right here. And I love all these titles. They're designed by fantastic artists. I really like the hot pink hijab and the hot pink lips of Nada here. And then my most recent book, which is 3 Holidays and a Wedding. I co-wrote this with Marissa Stapley, and this is a multi-faith holiday rom-com, which is actually set in the year 2000. And this really happened in the year 2000. Christmas, Ramadan, and Hanukkah all happened within days of each other. Well, Ramadan, the feast at the end of the month, happened within days of Christmas and Hanukkah. And it was a really special time where these 3 monotheistic faiths were basically celebrating major holidays all at the same time. Our book is basically set in the year 2000, and it's a Hallmark movie, except it's multi-faith.
The connection between Austen and rom-coms is fairly obvious. And did
Yes.
Austen invent the rom-com genre is certainly up for debate. With Much Ado About Nada, I noticed that, like in Persuasion, we have this main couple, Baz and Nada, who have this secret past that nobody knows about, and it slowly emerges over the course of the novel. And that's kind of a familiar trope in a rom-com, right? What attracts you to that trope? What makes that such a fun trope to play with in your writing?
I think part of it is because I'm attracted to rom-coms partly because they present a challenge. They can be very formulaic. They can be very, like any genre of fiction, they can be very limited by the conventions of the genre, right? So any romance novel, the main plot line has to focus on the central couple or whatever form that couple or relationship takes. and the romantic relationship of that central couple. And then there has to be at the end of the book some kind of a happy ending, a happy for now ending, and those rules are basically written in stone. If you try to contravene those rules, romance readers get very upset, right? And there's other smaller rules as well. And so for me as a writer, as someone who I've enjoyed so many rom-coms, so many romance novels over the course of many years, I wanted to see romance with characters who look like me, characters who were visibly Muslim, who were maybe the children of immigrants, maybe kind of inhabited that other space within a mainstream society like Canada. In my case, all my books are set in Canada, except for the last one, set in Toronto. And I saw a comment about that. So yes, shout out to Toronto. And then in addition, yes, in addition to that, the conventions are such that you have to kind of make the story still feel as if the ending is in question. And a lot of people who read Much Ado About Nada were like, I knew they were going to get together at the end, but I didn't. There was a point in the book where I wasn't 100% sure. And that's when I know that I've done my job, where people are still like, they know it's a romance and they know it's going to have a happy ending, but is it really? And what is it going to look like? So I think a lot of writers take that on as a challenge. Like, how can you play with a genre that has so many well-worn tropes and yet make it fresh and new? And one of the ways that I try to do that is to, breathe a little bit of new life into Jane Austen by retelling the story set in a very specific community. It's that globalization that we're talking about, global themes set in a very local setting.
So we have a couple questions here about your writing process. What is your writing process? Do you read conversations or any parts out loud to yourself? Because your dialogues are very, very natural.
Thank you. Well, that's probably the teaching part of it, is when you spend your days talking, right? I think I've always had an ear for dialogue, and that's why writing a play became so easy to me. I don't read any of it out loud to myself. I know I always tell my students to read their work out loud, but when you're writing a 100,000 word book, it gets really tiring and you'll just keep losing your voice. My writing process, it depends. If I'm teaching, like if it's not the school holidays, I go to work, I do my teaching, I put my teacher hat on, and I'm instructing during the day. And then I tend to write in the evenings if I have time, on the weekends and during school holidays. And as a result of that, things can be very slow. Sometimes I become a morning lark and I'll wake up an hour or two before I have to get ready for school and write. I usually don't do that because I'm not a morning person. It's only when deadlines are bearing down on me and I don't have a choice. Otherwise, I'm a night owl. So I'll, do my night day job, come home, take the kids wherever they need to go. And of course, I have a very supportive spouse, so we help with that. Someone will make dinner, sometimes me, sometimes my husband. And then after everyone is kind of set for the night, between 8 and 12, I'll write. And I can't do that, every night because I'm tired, but I'll do that a couple of times a week. In the summer, I'll treat it like a day job. I'll work during the days as much as I possibly can. I tend to write an outline for my book. I've started to do that more and more recently. And it's a 10 to 20 page document, just a Word doc where I tell myself the story, what happens in the story. And from that document, I kind of winnow it down into different chapters. Sometimes I do character sketches as well. And a lot of the times that stuff never actually makes it into the book. It's just so I can kind of clear my mind and set my focus on the novel and the world that I'm building. Lately, I've been sticking quite closely to the outline, whatever the outline does turn out to be. And the outline kind of serves as the map. And the story, of course, veers off into the woods sometimes, but I try to pull it back and then stick to the main plot of the story.
Nice. Thank you. Following up here. Yeah. Eric,
do you have someone in mind when you're writing for or to? I always write for myself. I know that sounds very conceited, but I think it's because I feel like so much of writing is you just sitting in a room talking to yourself. Like it's a very lonely process until I'm ready to share whatever I've written with my beta readers, with my editor, with my agent. My husband is one of my early readers too. Right now he's reading my detective novel, my very first mystery novel. And his feedback is really irritating because he's always right. So when he says something, I'm like, oh my God, I know, just finish it. But that's at the end of a long process. I've spent months, almost half a year plotting out this book, writing this book, and then fixing it and writing a second draft of this book, and then before it's ready to give to someone else. So I almost have to write for myself because I'm impatient, and it would take too long for me to get to the point where I'm willing to share and get someone else's feedback. So I have to write. That's why a lot of the jokes are, I think they're funny. I don't know if anyone else is laughing with me, but I'm laughing. Like there's a joke in Hannah Khan Carries On. The book is set in kind of the world of halal restaurants. Toronto has a lot of halal restaurants, and halal essentially means it's like kosher. It's like the way that the meat is prepared and the meat is slaughtered. Anyways, I made up this dish in Hannah Khan Carries On, which any South Asian person will tell you is disgusting. In Canada, we have a dish called poutine. For those of you who are not familiar, it's fries topped with gravy and cheese curds. It's delicious. It's very popular across the country. It originated in Montreal. And in South Asian cuisine, there's a dish called biryani, which is rice. It's like a rice casserole with meat in it, usually meat. And there's specific ways to make it, regional differences. So when Hannah Khan Carries On, I made a dish called biryani poutine, which is rice and the meat topped with the fries and the gravy and the cheese curds, which was a joke because I think it's disgusting, but everyone keeps asking me where they can buy biryani poutine. And this is what happens when you spend too much time by yourself, talking to yourself and writing books. You make jokes that other people think is real.
Speaking of Hannah Khan Carries On, we have a question from an audience participant. Let me display this really quick. What is the film development process like, and when can we enjoy the film versions of your novels?
So the second question is, I don't know. The film development process is like the publishing process in the sense that it takes forever and the entire process is extremely opaque. Even when you're in publishing, you don't entirely know what's happening. The Coles Notes version or the Spark Notes version is that essentially when a book comes out, oftentimes if you have an agent or a film agent, they will share your manuscript with production companies. Who basically, yeah, heart attack and a bullet's true, or people that they know in the industry, film scouts for production companies. And sometimes these production companies will say, oh, we're looking for a rom-com like that. That's a little bit different. We're looking for a Jane Austen retelling. Oh, that sounds like a really interesting novel. They'll read it and then they'll what's called option it. And what that means is that they say that for a year or for 2 years or for 6 months, they're going to try to see if they can make a movie out of your book. 99.999% of the time, nothing happens. Just because making a movie it costs a lot of money. It's an incredibly complicated process. Once someone has optioned your book, like my books, have been optioned. Aisha at Last was optioned, and Hannah Khan Carries On has been optioned as well. The next step is to try to hire a screenwriter to get to the point of writing a screenplay that everyone likes. And then after they have that, then they try to find a director. And if they can find a director, then they try to attach some cast. And even then, you don't know if the movie's actually happening. So most books get optioned multiple times if you're lucky. Most books that are optioned don't turn into a movie. And a lot of times books are optioned for like decades before they're made into anything, which my experience, my little limited experience in the film industry has made me appreciate so much when a book actually makes it onto the screen. It's an enormous undertaking. That being said, Hannah Khan Carries On is still under option. The option was renewed, and Amazon Studios seems keen to make it, but that could mean nothing and everything. So I don't know. We're somewhere between it's never going to happen to yes, it's a sure thing. And I don't exactly know how to gauge that half the time. The wonderful thing being the author and not directly involved is I get to just boast about it, but I don't actually have to do anything about it, which I am totally fine with.
Nice.
Are you concerned that the film adaptation might not honor your own goals as an author?
This is a really interesting question, Inga. I get this question a lot, especially from my community. So like they'll be like, "Oh, well, are you worried about the representation of will it honor and will it kind of follow the book?" And my conversation with my producers, with the screenwriter, I know the screenwriter. We're actually friends, and I trust her. She's also a young Muslim woman, which is fantastic. But my attitude towards this is a little bit maybe unorthodox, in the sense that I don't care if the book and the movie are completely different at all, because in my mind, my book exists. It's in libraries, it's in bookstores, it's a thing. And if the movie is different from the book, I'm fine, because I know how desperately my community, and I'm talking about the global Muslim community here, how desperately my community needs mainstream representation in pop culture. In fact, I think our community has been maligned in many cases as a result of the lack of that representation. So I want more Muslim stories on the screen. And if the story, as long with the caveat that they're not disrespectful, they don't pander to stereotypes. I'm like, don't put any like violent extremists, because I don't write about that. My books are all fun romances. Let's have Muslims falling in love. And what those Muslims look like is totally fine and up to the screenwriter and the casting director. So I'm really open to everything.
Great. Here we have a joke from Abigail. Except she didn't get any proceeds. So
yeah, good point. Public domain.
That's right. And so I think we're going to maybe possibly read to us a little bit from Much Ado About Nada. I'd love to hear that.
Sure, yeah. I would love to. Here's my copy of the book. So I've chosen, usually when I read from my books, I usually read from the beginning of the book. But considering that we're having a conversation with Austen experts, I thought it would be fun to read from kind of the middle of the book. And so this is probably one of the most obvious references to persuasion in Much Ado About Nada. And this will really get to the heart of the conflict between the main characters, Nada and Baz. So Nada, of course, is the Anne Elliot character, and Baz is the Captain Frederick Wentworth character. And they really sort of discuss what's at the heart of their disagreement here. And if you have read Persuasion recently, you will recognize this part. So a little bit of an explanation here before I start reading. I'm going to read from the Berkeley edition. It's the US edition on page 145 at the top. And
teacher right now.
Yeah, I know. Children, let's open up our classes, our books too. And what's happening in this excerpt is that for the first half of the novel, Nada and Baz are essentially at a giant Muslim convention. It's a real thing that happens. I actually attended it this year in Toronto. I describe it as like it's Comic-Con for Muslims, with like, you know, instead of cosplaying, we're wearing like hijabs and beards, right? So that's what we're doing. And so they're at this giant convention, and at the end of the convention, some of the people are invited to like this VIP dinner. So Nada is there with Baz, and a rival love interest, someone who's kind of really interested in Baz, is there as well. And her name is Firdos, and she's kind of trying to grab Baz's attention. And she's supposed to be a comic character. So page 145. They stood in awkward silence for a moment until finally Firdos turned back to Nada. I heard you own that cute little app, Ask Appa. So clever of you to try to build on the popularity of Ukti. You're like Duplo to Ukti's Lego. Nada drowned her samosa and green chutney and said nothing. What are you doing now? Firdos asked, determined to keep the conversation going. I'm taking some time and considering my options, Nada said, with a straight face, though inwardly she seethed. For instance, should I step on your fancy dress and make you trip, or should I be the bigger person? She thought. Decisions, decisions. Firdaus laughed prettily. I wish I could do that, but I'm such a decisive person. When I make up my mind, it's made up. Baz looked at Firdaus with interest for the first time since she'd arrived. Do you think you were born like that, or was it something you were taught? She preened under his attention. I've always known my own mind. My mom says I never wavered or second-guessed a decision, even as a child. That must be a relief to your friends and family, Baz said thoughtfully. A person too indecisive can hardly be depended on. You'd always worry anybody might sway them one way or another. His eyes met Nada's. Let those who would be happy be firm. Nada put her plate down. Let me make sure I understand you, Firdaus, she said pleasantly. You think people should never be allowed to waver, to come to a different conclusion? Baz interrupted before Firdaus could defend her reasoning. I think she means she knows her own mind and can't be persuaded otherwise. An admirable quality, don't you think? Firdaus looked from Baz to Nada, frowning. It was clear she didn't like being sidelined. Though she wasn't entirely following the conversation, she didn't like the direction it was taking, namely away from her. No, I don't. Seeking nasiha, or sincere advice, and listening to people you trust when you're unsure is natural, Nada interrupted, eyes pinned on Baz. Even when their advice is wrong? Baz gripped his plate so hard Nada worried it would crack. Blood pounded in her ears, and Nada felt a sick feeling of dread pool in her stomach. They had finally arrived at the crux of everything, the reason she had avoided this convention for years. Despite her best efforts, they were about to have the conversation they had so far avoided this weekend and for the past 6 years. There's nothing more human than being wrong, she said quietly now, or being persuaded one way and then regretting your decision. I would argue that learning to live with that regret is the most human thing of all. Firdaus, nearly wriggling with the urge to be part of the conversation, piped up. Doesn't it just come down to faith? She asked. When you make a decision and stick to it, you're showing that you have faith in yourself or in your path or in someone else, right? She looked from one to the other like an eager puppy, seeking validation, and Nada wanted to cry because even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and somehow Firdaus had hit on the truth exactly. That's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I mentioned this in the green room when we were talking before the event began, when we were discussing persuasion. This particular scene, of course, is a very famous moment in the book when Captain Wentworth and Elliot are indirectly confronting what really led to their breakup. I was really inspired to write this scene because of an example of, in my opinion, this is just my opinion and probably the internet's opinion, bad art. And that bad art was the movie Persuasion that Netflix came out with a year or two ago. And I remember watching that. When I first heard of it, I was really excited because any Austen adaptation is exciting for me. And then when I watched it, I was incandescent with rage because I thought that they did such a terrible job and completely butchered the meaning behind the movie. And then again, this is my opinion. I know some people actually enjoyed the movie. They probably haven't read Persuasion, but they did enjoy the movie. So when I watched the movie, and this is what I mean by bad art can be as instructive sometimes as good. Well, when I watched the movie, it helped me to break down what I was trying to do and what the point of my take on Persuasion was. And I had to kind of revisit the book, which of course I've read many times, but I revisited it with a greater understanding of why the Netflix Persuasion, in my opinion, failed so disastrously. What were they missing? And I think one of the things about one of the things that that they lacked was that bittersweet thread that runs through the book. And one of the things that Persuasion, I think, talks about and captures so well is this idea that is super relatable, which is the idea of regret. And a lot of the book is just Anne Elliot thinking that she has made a mistake when she was a younger, inexperienced, more impressionable young woman. And she allowed Frederick to leave her. She broke the engagement. She allowed him to go. And she realized quite quickly that it was a mistake, that she shouldn't have done that. And when we meet her in the book, she's, it's been 8 years, and we think that we are as convinced as her that she can never undo that mistake. And I think there's nothing more relatable than that. Like, how everyone has a mistake that they made in their life, that they made probably in all innocence, probably hoping for something better in the future. And then you look back on that mistake and you think, I can never undo that. There's nothing I can do in my life that will take that moment, that will bring that moment back to me. I never get a redo. Which is why we cheer for her so much when Frederick Wentworth comes back into her life, and it's slowly revealed that he never forgot her, just as she never forgot him. And so in this moment in my book, that's what I was trying to capture, where Nada was arguing, as Anne Elliot never really got to do, that, I was young, I made a mistake, and I thought I had to live with that mistake for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean I was wrong. It just means that I have a regret. And I don't know, I think that's a very humanizing take on persuasion, which the movie did not capture. So that's one of the reasons it sucks.
We have strong feelings from our audience this evening. Yes.
Yes, but I share those strong feelings, but I'm also beholden to that persuasion, because it really made me rethink what I was trying to do with this book. And it was just, the timing couldn't have been better, because I was in the middle of edits and I was like, okay, let me really think about this a bit more.
So your art was fueled by anger.
It was fueled by fury. That's right.
Righteous indignation.
It's the best way to write.
And kind of adding on to that, we have another comment from an audience member kind of agreeing with you. You captured the essence of persuasion beautifully in Much Ado. Nada's decision was at once totally understandable and also regretful. So the line that stuck out to me from your reading, when Nada says, I would argue that learning to live with that regret is the most human thing of all. You tap into this humanizing idea, and then yet you situate it in a very kind of localized arena, this Muslim convention. And I don't want to totally spoil it for people who haven't read it yet, but you kind of use your setting to even tie in certain characters from Aisha at last. And it becomes this arena where you can represent certain communities, certain marginalized communities. What is it about kind of your art that is driving you there?
So there are some cameos from my other books. It was a joy to write those cameos, to a very small extent. Like they don't take over the narrative or anything. That my books are not sequels, but they're set in the same universe, I guess. Like if we're to use a Marvel vocabulary, so in the same universe. And I think what drives me to it is I'm writing about Toronto. I'm writing about a community that I'm intimately aware of, and I'm a part of this community. This convention, I call it the Deen and Dunya convention in this book, but it's very similar to actual conventions that I've attended in Canada as well as in the United States. These are like big convention centers that are filled for a weekend with 10, 20, 40, 50,000 Muslims who come in from all over the world, all over the country, and just kind of gather. And we're, I mean, when I remember attending as a young person, and like the reason I went was to just go look at the cute boys. Like there was really no other purpose. It wasn't like, now as an adult, it's to meet up with friends I haven't seen perhaps all year. And we're all going to go to the convention because that's where you get some great deals in the bazaar, and you'll get some nice hijabs for a good price, and let's buy some halal gummy bears and also catch up with some of our friends, and listen to some inspiring lectures from visiting scholars from around the world. It's all kind of in one package. And so I'm drawn to write about this community, whether it's about the convention in Much Ado About Nada, or in Hannah Khan Carries On about halal restaurants, or in Pride and Prejudice I talk about even smaller mosque community. I'm driven to writing about this because, again, I write for myself, right? And I also write for the forgotten or perhaps unspoken experiences of just a regular person who's part of these communities. I think it's fascinating. I think they're microcosms, just like Jane Austen wrote about what she knew, her the people that populated her imagination were also the same people that she lived with, and she was neighbors with, or were inspired by some of her own personal experiences. My books are the same. I want to allow some of my readers who perhaps have never met a South Asian immigrant or a Muslim immigrant before to really kind of pull back the curtain and be like, so what do you guys talk about in the mosque? Turns out it's the same thing you talk about when you're in your church or you're sitting in your temple. We have the same machinations, manipulative aunties and gossiping uncles, and romantic love stories play out in the exact same way. It's just in a slightly different setting. I think that's fascinating because I've spent my life reading about the experiences of people who aren't like me. And so I want to provide the same opportunity for my readers to let them kind of peek behind what it's like within my world.
That's lovely. And you succeeded that very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pooh Bear and I are going to quibble with you, or we're feeling our age or something. Pooh Bear says, I must be old. I thought Nada made the right decision at the time, and too, in my 20s, I thought differently. So I also agree. I don't think that Anne Elliot did make a mistake. She was in an unfortunate situation. But I mean, as she also says towards the end, that she did the right thing. I think that it's Wentworth who made the mistake that when he had money, he should have, what was it, like 2.5 years after their parting, he had enough money to come back and propose, but didn't. So what do you? I mean, do you think that are you blaming Anne too much? What do you think?
I never thought of it. This is the great thing about talking to Austen scholars. I can actually get into the weeds because most people are like, persuasion's the one with who again? Yeah, you know what? I think you might be right because looking back on it, when Baz and Nada first meet, they're very young. They're university students. Not the first time they meet, but in the romantic version of their life. And I don't know. Like I guess the decision to, I don't want to give away any spoilers from my novel, but let's say for Persuasion, the decision that Anne made to break off the engagement that she had with Captain Wentworth was a result of a lot of pressure from outside sources, and I think that's what Wentworth really couldn't forgive her for, and kind of allowed his pride to take over for him. And I think for Nada, she was also similarly influenced by someone. And Baz was angry that he at one point in the book, he says that, you can't, and I wonder if Wentworth feels the same way, that if you can't accept me right now as the person I am today, how can I count on you to stick by my side, even, towards the person that I become in the future, which I think presents an interesting point, right? Speaking as someone who got married quite young, I got married when I was 23, which I think by today's standards is quite young. It really does feel, when you agree to marry someone at that age, I don't even exactly know looking back on it, I don't think I knew exactly who I was at that point. And while diving into any new relationship feels like a real leap, I think there's something to be said to making such a big commitment to someone when you're that young. And in Nada's case, I think she was scared. There was a lot of fear there. But I think in Anne's case, her fear was more in the fear of disappointing those people around her, as opposed to what she herself wanted. And the lesson she had to learn was, one of the lessons she had to learn, and Nada has to learn this too, is to just trust herself, trust her instincts.
So a question from the audience. When you think about adapting Austen, and you thinking about Much Ado About Nada or Aisha at Last, do you ever find an idea that doesn't work? Given all the ways you've captured the parts that still resonate, have you found parts that don't anymore? I think that's an interesting one.
So one of the things in Much Ado About Nothing that was difficult to kind of reconcile was at the heart of the play, there's a little bit of slut shaming. Which I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make that modern, because I just don't think that will really fly. So there are parts of the book that of books and plays that are set in the past, whether it's the very recent past, like, You've Got Mail, I adapted in in various ways, that you kind of have to leave in the past because it just doesn't really serve the story, or it doesn't really serve today's sensibilities. But for me, I think a lot about any book before I decide to dive in and write it. Like my mystery series that I mentioned I'm working on, I had the idea for this book in 2017, and I didn't do anything about it because I just was like, I need to figure this out in my head to see if the idea is actually viable and is worth me devoting the amount of time and energy and effort that I know it takes to actually bring it to fruition. So if it has lasted and it's still kind of in my head after a couple of years, and I know that there's something there that I want to explore. And ironically, for this book, For Much Ado About Nada, I didn't, as much as I wanted it to be a book about about persuasion, about retelling of persuasion, the real thematic question that I was asking myself as I wrote the book was this idea of female ambition, and how can Nada is an engineer, and there was a brief reference in the beginning of the excerpt that I read to an app that she developed and that failed, that it didn't go anywhere because the idea was stolen by a rival. One of the key things that brought me to this book was this idea of female ambition. When you come from a community that maybe does not encourage female ambition in a very strong way. And it's not to say that the Muslim community or the South Asian community doesn't want women to be successful. That's not what I'm saying at all. But Nada feels the pressure to get married by a certain age, to have reached certain milestones by a certain age. And it's really difficult to achieve that while also running after economic ambition or career ambitions. So she is struggling. In one of the things I wanted to discuss in a really honest way is what do you have to sacrifice in order to be successful? And I guess it's something that I think about a lot too, as someone who did get married young, did have children young, and then I feel like I came to my ambition later on in life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just, there's certain trade-offs to the decisions that you make. It's the same thing with Nada, right? Like whatever decision you make, it will have a consequence.
Do you think you'll ever quit teaching and just write full time?
I love teaching, but the more I get enmeshed in publishing, I think I'm approaching the point where I am going to have to make a decision. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, selfishly, sorry, students, but selfishly, I hope you are able to do that.
Thank you. Me too.
Thinking, we have some other fun comments here from your fans. CE tried chai latte because of you.
Amazing.
That sense of responsibility feel.
I have a latte every morning, and I would recommend try making chai for yourself. It's essentially just like a quick recipe would be 1 part water for 2 parts milk, and then add some cardamom or some cinnamon sticks, and then just boil it with a tea bag or 2 tea bags for 20 minutes. That's a really simple chai recipe if you want to try that. But chai lattes are good too.
So quick. Another question is, so thinking, you kind of got at this from a different angle before, but I'm just going to turn it around a little bit. The thinking not only of your work, but also Sonia Kamal, Sonali Dev, people who were with you at that JASP 5 years ago. What is it about Austin that makes her such a good candidate for this kind of, Eric's word, globalization, especially given the fact that she never traveled outside of England, had a very narrow circle of acquaintance. What is it about Austin that invites this kind of thing, if it is her that is inviting?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can speak to from my perspective as someone who grew up in a South Asian community. As I said, my parents immigrated from India, from specifically a city called Hyderabad in India. And when I read Jane Austen, I mean, she is part of the canon, right? Like the Western canon of literature. When I read Jane Austen as a young person, I just saw immediately so many parallelisms between her experiences, even though they occurred at the time almost 2 centuries ago, and now over 2 centuries, to my own experiences. And that was this idea of small communities, very close-knit families who are kind of in each other's business a lot. This preoccupation with, hatching, matching, and dispatching, marriage and children and things like that. It's so similar to the preoccupations of, let's say, a very traditional mindset among some South Asian communities. And seeing this reflected in a British author who was writing so long ago was shocking and also hilarious. And the courtship rituals among a certain community of like observant Muslim or observant Hindu South Asian communities are very similar to the kind of highly chaperoned meetings that take place in matrimonial rituals that take place in Jane Austen. And it's interesting to see it reflected, right? It's interesting to see that parallel structure. And even now, the central idea, like Eric, I think you said, the debate is Jane Austen, does she write rom-coms? Does she write social satire? And yet Pride and Prejudice is one of the OG enemies to lovers type of books, right? Like it basically launched a million copycats, because that is one of my favorite tropes as well in romance. But for me, it was just seeing some of those same social expectations, the social what's the word? The same social niceties being played out and limitations being played out in Jane Austen's world that were so similar to the same things that were happening in particular South Asian Muslim communities. That really inspired me.
Nice.
That's lovely.
We also want to take kind of the last little bit of our conversation tonight to talk about some of your other works, like Three Holidays and a Wedding and your play. And we have a question from the audience about your future work as well. Like, so moving from rom-com to the mystery genre, what adjustments are you making in your process? Although, come to find out, you've had this idea for many, many years, but if you are kind of in the process of writing detective fiction or a mystery genre, like what is that writing looking like for you these days?
Yeah, I did it because I'd written 4 rom-coms, and I just wanted a new challenge. Not to say that I've mastered rom-coms by any means, but I wanted to try my hand at something else. And I always wanted to write a mystery, specifically a cozy mystery. I find them really fun. I read them all the time.
What do you mean by cozy mystery? I'm not familiar with that term.
Oh, a cozy mystery is when you have an amateur sleuth, so not someone directly involved in law enforcement, and there is the gore and violence threshold is a lot less. So there's not like it's like golden detective fiction. It's like Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers. You don't have like a terribly violent or graphic violence in the book at all. Those are more thrillers. They're more police procedurals where you have like the really grisly parts of the crime. Cozy mysteries focus more on the character of the sleuth and the community surrounding the sleuth. So it's very similar to like my jam. That's what I'm into. I think even Aisha at last to some extent, Hannah Khan and definitely Nada at their core have some kind of a mystery that's unraveled. And so I've always kind of put a little bit of either a plot twist in the case of Nada, or some kind of something that the audience, the readership doesn't actually know until a character reveals it to them, or the plot reveals it to them. So I've always played around with the idea of mystery, but when you're writing an actual mystery, I had to do the same deep dive that I did when I was getting into the rom-com space, which was to really figure out what the rules of the genre are. I have a little sticky in my note in my laptop where I wrote down some of the things. Every clue that invalidates one suspect should incriminate another. So I would write things like this. Make it clear from the start that it's a mystery. Like there's a certain tone, there's certain genre conventions in mysteries, and different types of mysteries that are clear. So, like what's the difference between a Sherlock Holmes mystery with his Watson character, or a Poirot with their Hastings character, like a buddy mystery, where the story is told by the sidekick from the sidekick's perspective,
Mhm.
versus a first person or a third person mystery where you only have the detective's perspective. That's very different. So I had to make a lot of those kind of decisions. I hope to write a series. And I had to make those types of decisions when I kind of dived into mystery. But you know, the jury's still out. I'm still writing it. I don't know if it's any good. I hope it is, but we'll find out. You'll find out.
So it's like the Lemon Cakes and Murder, or the with the new series Thursday Murder Club with the octogenarians.
Yes.
Did that count as well? Okay.
Yes, yes. So that's more what the vibe that I'm going for. I didn't want to get too cutesy, like it's not scrapbooking mysteries, but it's more Thursday Murder Club. If any of the audience is familiar with Nita Prose's book, The Maid, that came out last year, that was fantastic as well. I'm a big fan of Anthony Horowitz. He wrote Magpie Murders, The Moonflower Murders, and another series called, the first one is called The Word is Death. I think it's called The Word is Death. Anthony Horowitz. Yeah. Nope, The Word is Murder. That's what it's called.
That word, yeah.
And so you also wrote a play last year.
That's right.
We have a video clip that we can show in just a second
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Show our audience a little bit of that. But do you want to preface that and explain what the video is going to show, what your play is about?
Definitely, yeah. So just before the pandemic started, I was approached by Silk Road Institute, which is a Canada-based Muslim-focused arts organization. And one of their mandates is to try to basically encourage Muslim creatives in various mediums. They approached me to write a play, and they said, you know, we've done 2 plays in the past, and they were both very depressing. We want a comedy. Uzma, can you write us comedy? And after some persuasion, I needed to be persuaded. I agreed. And I'm a big fan of kind of like those that over the top romps, like Noises Off, The Producers. You know, I love those types of plays. They're hilarious. And so I wanted to write one. And since my subject matter so often is about families and about arranged marriage, I thought it would be really hilarious if I wrote a kind of comedy, a social commentary on arranged marriage, where everybody's preconceptions are completely wrong. And I called it The Rishta. The Rishta is a Urdu word for the suitor. And the premise of the play essentially is main character, Sama, comes to her parents and tells them, I've hired myself a matchmaker, and she's going to present a couple of suitors to us because I want to get married. And I want to get married in the traditional way because I know that you, my parents, are so very, very traditional and want to arrange my marriage. Meanwhile, the parents have basically been lying to their children by pretending to be way more traditional than they actually are, and are horrified that their daughter has taken them seriously. And then, of course, the daughter is playing a long con. She actually met someone and wants to marry him, and is convinced her parents are so traditional. The only way that she'll be able to introduce her fiance to her parents is if they meet a whole bunch of terrible, awful, very awful suitors first, and then she presents her suitor to them. So they're not communicating, they're not talking to each other. It's a very common problem among immigrant families where they're all lying to each other. And I noticed this kind of recurring among my generation, where growing up, we kept a lot of like secret relationships from our parents. And then we're like, oh, look, here's a guy, I've never met him before. Perhaps he would be good for you to meet as well. And meanwhile, they've been dating for 5 years. So that happens all the time. It's a very South Asian thing. I thought it would be fun to make fun of that. And it was. So that's what The Rishta is about.
Cool. Sounds great. It sounds a little bit of a Molière plot too.
Yes. Yes.
That's silly. I love
we can
it.
watch this brief, like, 1.5-minute video clip now.
We were looking for a script that had universal values, that of course spoke to the diversity of Muslim stories, which is something we care about at Silk Road Institute, and a comedy, something that folks can find humor in the everyday connections that we make. So Usma came up with The Rishta, which speaks to those universal values and speaks to, you know, love, finding a partner, intergenerational differences,
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's first of all, it's fun, it's playful, and it's both super culturally specific and offers much needed representation to the Muslim Canadian community, but it also is such a universal theme about family and love and learning how to see each other and learn to recommunicate with each other, or relearn to communicate with each other, which I think every person in the audience can connect to. It's a really important play in kind of the cultural landscape of the Montreal theatre community, and yeah, I'm excited for everyone to see it. We were going through casting and design and everything all at the same time, so it was a really busy couple of months. But first and foremost, I think there's always a particular challenge when it comes to directing comedy. Comedy is extremely subjective, and each person is going to find different things funny. So it was about finding a kind of universal playfulness with the cast, and seeing what's going to land. But of course, also really exciting to be working on such a playful piece.
Oh, that looks like so much fun. Was it just the best experience getting to write that play and be involved in that production?
Yeah, it was really amazing. The entire production, the cast was fantastic, and it was so interesting as a novelist to kind of see something that I had written come to life in this way. And I think that was the most rewarding part. And also at times the most jarring experience, where I had written these words and they, again, lived in my head for so many years, because I started work on this before the pandemic, and the play was brought to production last spring in 2023. And to actually see people performing my words, at times I was cringing, and then times I was like, can I rewrite that real quick? Just stop what you're doing, and I'm just gonna but it was also really fascinating the way that actors, of course, with their creative spirit and their art, take my words and kind of spin it and give it a new life. So that was really cool as well. And like I said, I just think I want to see more Muslim stories out there, and if I felt so privileged to be able to be like, wow, I wrote something that these actors, some of whom were Muslim, were able to, get a job for, bringing this production to life. Like that, I did that, and I thought that was really cool as well.
When can we see it or read it, or what kind of access will we have?
So Silk Road does want to take the company, bring it to Toronto, and then maybe other places. So if any of you know of any theater companies or theaters that would be interested in bringing the show to your home, please do get in touch. And they're also working on a PDF version of the play that maybe I will post on my more about this on my website.
That can be licensed.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
Wonderful.
Someone a little thank you note from Jennifer Burton. Enjoying it.
Amazing, yeah. And also, Lori, I see your recommendation for a mystery writer. I'm definitely going to check that person out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that person either. That'll be fun. Getting a long reading list from the crowd tonight.
Especially since this writer loves Austin, that makes me extra excited to check them out.
Yeah, me too.
And Lori has good taste. So this has been really wonderful to talk with you and to hear about all of your projects. And I do desperately hope you'll have more time to create many, many more.
Me too.
All series we've been trying to convince people to make an adaptation of Mansfield Park. So if you ever want to take a stab at Mansfield Park, please do.
That's a tough one, right? Yeah. There's a fantastic Canadian writer, Sylvia Moreno, Garcia Moreno, I think her name is. She wrote American Gothic. Mexican Gothic. Apologies. A fantastic book, and I think she would do a great Mansfield Park, because she's really good at writing diverse Gothic vibes.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. If I'm lucky enough to meet her, I'll put it in her ear.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a thank you again, and thank you so much to our audience as well. Lots of really great questions. And please wait around if you can, just a few more minutes, so we can share a little bit more news with you. But first, we wanted to share the URL again to Usma's personal website, where you can find more information about her play and all of her wonderful books. And then Eric is now going to talk a little bit about what's coming next.
What's coming up next? Yeah, absolutely. Please do visit Uzma's website to purchase her books. Our next event, our final event of the Many Flavors of Austin, is February 6th with Siri James. She'll be joining us at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that day. And finally, we want to encourage you all, if you can, to please support Jane Austen and Company through donations if you're able. We're going to include this link here. Perfect. And we really we're really thrilled to be able to to offer free viewings of these wonderful events, and we hope to continue to do that going forward. So even a few dollars can make a big difference in our efforts at Jane Austen and Company. And I also just want to echo a thank you to Usma for joining us this evening. It's just been an absolute pleasure getting to talk with you.
It was a pleasure. It's always great to chat with both of you. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. Really appreciate it.
And another reminder that the recording of tonight's presentation will be posted to our website and at janeaustenandco.org and to YouTube very soon after we finish. And if you can't wait until February 6th for our next show, you can review all the previous programs. There are over 40 sessions recorded there on topics ranging from bookbinding in the Age of Austen to questionable home remedies from the Regency to Wedgwood's political importance in the anti-slavery movement in the Regency and unexpected connections between Austen and Byron. So we have so enjoyed bringing you this thought-provoking, we hope, programming for the past 3 years. And then, of course, we've got our Austen and the Brontes coming up. Where are you on that, by the way, Uzma?
I'm definitely Team Austen all the way. 100%. There's no hesitation.
All right. So we have is there a bit, can you, Nadia, can you post the link for the next show?
Oh, right. The Siri James slide one more time. And we do hope to see everybody back there for that on February 6th. Is that right, Inga? Is that the one you wanted to be displayed?
Yeah, I just was sure we hadn't seen that. Didn't know if we'd seen that. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening. And thank you again, Usma, for a great talk.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye. Good night.